Hey, I want to welcome everybody to the big picture of today. Me, myself, Grant McGaw, CEO of Five Star BDM and host of the Follow Brand podcast, and my counterpart over here, Chris Principe. I'll let him introduce himself. Today, we're going to talk about digital identity and compliance, what I feel is the missing link in the future of global finance. Why digital identity? Things like KYC and AML. I'm going to let Chris kind of define that. And then I know that this is a game changer for St. Croix. So with all that said, Chris, you'd like to chime in here, kind of introduce yourself and get us ready for this
Hey,
discussion.
Grant, great to see you as always. I'm Chris Principe, publisher of Financial IT, and we are at the big picture. And Grant, this is a really interesting topic because it has such dependencies. Like everything we do is dependent on trust, and trust is only gained by being assured of what you're seeing, what you're doing, what you are, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
if we just look first at the real world, right? Okay, so if we look at the real world, as far as identity goes, globally, your passport is the best form of identification. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but it's interesting because in the United States, there's only a little bit more than 40% of the people that have a passport. And if we go back to 2000, not the last, the first census of the new millennium, right? Back in
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
2000,
Yeah.
that number was really at 14% of Americans only had a passport. In other words, 86% of America had no passport. And Grant, I've had the personal experience of going into the bank, looking to cash my own check, giving my passport as identification, and having the teller say to me, "What's that? Don't you have a driver's license or a credit card?"
Yep.
And she's a young girl. She had never seen a passport before in her life. Okay. Now, the reasons why it has grown up to 40%, I'll give you a few. Okay. So 9/11 was a big reason because before 9/11, Americans could travel Canada, Mexico, the whole Caribbean without a passport, only a driver's license. That
Mm-hmm.
changed after 9/11, right?
I like
Then
it.
as we
Yeah.
get yeah, so we get later on, when you start looking from, let's say, 2005 to 2015, well, transportation price went down, the availability of airlines tickets, tourism. People said, well, if I have to get a passport here, why not also go to Europe? So that was an increase. But what I find the most interesting is we've had a jump now from the 2010 census to the 2020 census, and we've had a jump in the last few years, taking us from the low 20% up to about 41%. And it's the new millenniums, Grant. Uh, the younger generations are pushing this because instead of, and my opinion, right, instead of people looking to, buy homes, get a car, the younger generations are more interested in living experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And that just shouts out travel the world. So we've seen a great increase in passports since 2020, which
Yeah.
is why we're up to 41% now.
I think all this is important because you have to identify yourself. We're more international. We're traveling more. We're seeing more. We're getting more experience. And I know in our last, I would say our few shows that we've done, we've talked about merchant banking. We've talked about stable coins. And we've talked about St. Croix Virgin Islands' role as a financial hub. But there's one foundation we haven't tackled head on. We're going to do that today, and that's trust. When we talk about identity, talking about you have a trust, it's trust that you are who you say you are, right? So if we are building a modern financial ecosystem right here in the Virgin Islands, St. Croix, the question becomes, how do we make sure people and institutions actually trust who they're doing business with. What say you about that, Chris?
Well, Grant, you're spot on, because this is the key to really everything, right? And this is why today, when we go online for anything, it's just not a matter of your user ID and your password. There are other levels of security that are now in place for us to go through, and it's all about trust. I mean, there's that arms race that goes on between the criminals out there who are looking to bust into the internet in different ways and be able to take the money out of your account. And then there's the good guys on the other side who are looking to find ways of preventing them. And AI now has also been a big addition. Now, it's interesting is, with financial IT, with my publication, I've seen a great jump in just the last couple of years in companies that are in that identity, AML checks, compliance checks, in companies that there's a tremendous amount of companies out there now doing this from a lot of different directions. And I think that we're going to see over the next few years a lot of consolidation in that space. But it's all the same thing.
Let's do this, Chris. Help us do this. Because I don't think the audience understands these terms that you throw out. AML, like people are like, well, what is that? KYC, like what is that? And how does that roll into identity? Help us define those, if you don't mind, please.
Well, the definition of the initials KYC stands for Know Your Customer, right? And it's actually gone further for the banks, right? The banks do KYCC, right? Know your customer's customer, right?
Oh, okay.
So it's all about, it's all about the origination of the funds. Where does the money come from, and is it a legitimate source?
Right.
Okay. So this is a very important part in the banking side of it. Now, for most of us, that really is not what we're looking, to do or anything. You work a job, your job pays you. Obviously, it is a legitimate source of funds. You put it in your bank account, and then you want to spend it, and you should. The bank puts in a lot of restrictions now, though, to make sure of these things. And, what happens is, it's the old saying, Grant, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch, right?
Yeah.
So we have to suffer with a lot of extra restrictions and different kinds of sign-ons and all these things, because there are one bad apples in every bunch.
True. I mean, so we're hitting head on digital trust. We're talking about trust. We're hitting head on what that really means, because this is, you say, know your customer. People hear that, but this is an actual framework within these banks and how they verify your identity when it comes to AML, like what is anti-money laundering, right? Mm-hmm. So traditionally, like you've always said, I'm a brand guy. What is brand? Brand is perception. Brand really is what is in the idea of the person about you or your service in their mind, right? When you see the golden arches, you already have a perception of, oh, that is a McDonald's. I'm going to have a certain experience. There's a brand recognition, right? That brand identity, brand equity. So when you start thinking about Caribbean banking, we've talked about this extensively. What is the perception within the mind of many banks, even outside of the Caribbean? And a lot of times, it's not the most positive viewpoint. So when you understand narrative and you understand brand and you understand, all right, this is what is in the mind of my client or my customer. Know your customer. You got to know how people see you. So you know what? This is probably in your perception. So now I know that. How do I change the narrative? How do we change the narrative? Now you've got different things in play that you didn't have before. There was a traditional banking system, and there were certain things done a certain way. We're in a state of flux right now, whether it's in the technology layer, whether it's in the financial layer, and you're a financial IT guy. So you see this enormous changes going on. There is an opportunity to change the narrative, the opportunity to change the brand perception within the target market that you're looking to work with. So you got to make sure that we get this right, because we've seen financial systems collapse in other countries. And I remember like FTX, we've talked about that a little bit, but some, Caribbean jurisdictions, they get blacklisted. My question to you is, what happens when you don't get identity and compliance right?
Well, Grant, let me start off by going back in history a little bit. I like to do that, right? And with the banking system in general, with banks in general, the main thing that the banks bring to the world is that trust. You can trust me because I'm a bank, and you can put your money here. And by the way, for people to put their money anywhere other than their own pocket takes trust.
Mm-hmm.
So that image of trust has always been, one of the pillars of banking. And today, the CEOs of the bank, they're not worried about, somebody robbing the bank. They're not worried about somebody. Their main worry is loss of trust in their bank and in their banking name, right? That's their big thing. So the AML system, the terrorist funding, the security that's put in place with KYC is critically important to the banks, and there is jurisdiction from the banks in every country on how that is done, and there's checks and balances. And what the banks do behind the scenes is so much more than you can imagine. There's such a big process. I will tell you that when somebody says to me, I want to go into banking, right? I tell them compliance is the best field in banking right now, because they just have to keep hiring people in compliance to keep up with things, because the whole idea of losing trust, you lose your business if you're a bank. Now, when we talk about the Caribbean banks, they have a perception that is not the reality today, but they have a perception based on years ago where there was a lot of loose banking, where there was a very easy framework for people to hide money, for people to move money without having to really identify themselves. So the source, like we talked about at the beginning here, was cloudy. So it gave great opportunity for people in the drug trade, for instance, to use that banks and that banking system for people who were doing, illegal movement of people, for instance, to be able to. It's not true today. Today, the structure in banks in the Caribbean and the compliance that they do today is on level with what goes on here in the U.S.
This is important knowledge we need to understand and take into consideration. We're going to go to a quick break, and then we're going to come back. We're going to unpack more there, because I know if you're tuning in right now, you're leaning in, because we're talking about real things here that will affect us in the past, present, and in the future. So join us here in about another 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Third Wall Street is a new emerging global capital markets formation and structured trifactor financial hub at the U.S. Third Border in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, in the Caribbean and Latin America. The new Third Wall Street is the home of the Alexander Hamilton Financial Center and named in honor of Alexander Hamilton, an American founding father, first U.S. Treasury Secretary, and architect of the U.S. financial system and modern America. Third Wall Street is located in a U.S. National Heritage Area, Opportunity Zone, and the boyhood home of Alexander Hamilton in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Island, connecting 3 financial hubs in the Americas by way of new innovative financial technology and markets: New York Wall Street South, Brickell Avenue, Miami, and Third Wall Street in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands. and establish the new Caribbean America's single economy zone, developed by SETI Case Capital Markets. Third Wall Street will transform financial markets, improving access to capital worldwide. Visit www.thirdwallstreet.com to learn more.
With more than 50 years' experience in the Caribbean, investing, researching, and providing technical cooperation in the public and private sector alike, at the IDB Group, we know intimately the challenges facing the region.
The difference between influence and legacy, it's the platform that carries your voice. You're not visible because you lack talent. You're visible because your brand doesn't speak. I've built 5-star BDM to change that. Most leaders have the expertise, but not the presence, the vision, but not the vehicle. Across 3 cities, one brand is helping leaders rise above the noise. Here in the heart of Omaha, strategy isn't left to chance. It's engineered with precision. In Omaha, we engineered your Zachner brand, AI-powered, data-driven, precise. TISA went from a local nonprofit to a national speaker in 90 days. We don't guess your brand strategy, we build it. On the shores of St. Croix, your brand takes on depth and meaning, shaped through curated retreats and legacy experiences. In St. Croix, strategy becomes soul. Our retreats don't just refine your message, they rediscover your mission. One founder rewrote his entire company story here. Funding followed 30 days later. This is where leaders remember who they were meant to be. In Vibrant Miami, momentum meets amplification, transforming your voice into a movement. In Miami, your brand becomes a movement. Business development accelerators, audience building. Joy came with an old website and an outdated company name, but she left with 5,000 followers and a waiting list. This is where you scale with soul. 3 cities, 1 mission, your legacy ignited. It started with a thread. Let's pull it together. Stop blending and start leading. 5-star BDM, where legacy is engineered, embodied, and ignited. Visit 5starbdm.com and book your brand audit today.
All right, we are back. We are talking about digital identity and compliance at scale. Now, we've talked about some things that most people may not be aware of around KYC, which is Know Your Customer, or AML, anti-money laundering. And we want to talk about countries at risk, or what we call de-risking, where when that happens, the international banks simply will cut off access, which has happened in the past, especially in the Caribbean or parts of the Caribbean. It led to some banking shutdowns. It led to higher fees. It led to isolation from the global system. What we're talking about now is about how you get it right. And that's where we're building out SETI Case, which is St. Croix Economic Development Initiative, and the Caribbean America's Single Economy. And we want to become a magnet for international investment. So if I understood what Chris was saying, that if we are secure, that we're compliant, and we can move capital as fast as whether you're in New York or London, now you have an advantage. So my question to Chris comes down to this: how does digital identity change the game? And if I've got folks, and I know I've got some folks watching right now who run ports, who run hospitals, they run nonprofits, what is in it for them?
Grant, really kind of at a really important point right now, because so many things are changing when it comes to identity and when it comes to how you can secure those things. And AI is playing a big role, number one. And the role AI is playing generally is it speeds up the identification of things. It speeds up the ability to see further into that person's identification, right? And it gives that a quicker response time, which is important, because if you're logging into your banking application, you don't want to wait there for a long time before you can get your money, right? You want your money when you want your money, understandably. So that becomes a very important part. But what banks have to do on their side is really so much work and so intensive in terms of the scrutiny that is given to what the banks do from governmental bodies, from the Federal Reserve banks, from the central banks. All these things really play into it and become very difficult to bank. So when we look at the Caribbean and we look at over the past 10 years or so where the de-risking has come in, the reason for de-risking, it's kind of very simple, okay? In a lot of ways, for international banks, U.S. banks, for instance, European banks also, for those banks that are outside of the Caribbean, they look at it and there's just one thing that they say to themselves is that it's all about one bad transaction. That's it.
Mhm.
Okay, and what that means, let me put it into some terms, right? Okay, say a bank that is U.S. Bank. I'm Citibank, right? And
Mhm.
we've been doing business in Barbados for 20 years, okay? And we pull out of Barbados, and we pull out because at the possibility of getting a bad transaction. Okay, so let's say one transaction that is found to be money laundering, right? The fine you could get in the U.S. from the Federal Reserve Bank, could get billions. We at Citibank, we don't make for the last 20 years that much profit out of Barbados, and we won't make that much profit the next 20 years. So it becomes a very simple decision to, let's pull out because we want to risk one single transaction that could hit us with a big fine that will make back whatever profit we need or will make.
This is important to note. And Chris, we're going to bring him back up here in a second to clear out his internet. But I noticed that when it comes to identity, I know the big banks, they have their way of doing things, but from an individual standpoint, what we're really talking about with your digital identity, and I'm going to go to the end user frame of this equation, is that you won't need to resubmit a lot of paperwork over and over again. I mean, that's always been a big problem, because if you've been identified and verified, that should be utilized, and it's a trusted source, so you don't have to resubmit your paperwork over and over again. This is one of the big benefits of what we're starting to see now in the financial world. So you can prove your credibility instantly to an investor or supplier. This is about speed to market. So if you can cut down on the time it takes to truly identify exactly who you are, that's going to speed up everything within what you're doing from a supplier standpoint. And then you can be funded quicker, right? So like a hospital can verify to its vendors or funders globally without long due diligence. And every hospital knows it takes a long time from a revenue cycle perspective to bring everything full circle for what's happening. This is a game-changing moment, because this de-stresses the situation when it comes to, I supplied a service, I need to be now reimbursed for that service, and that time cycle now instead of becoming 60, 90 days can be done really in a matter of either seconds or days. So that is a huge, big, time saving and transaction of money. So we're talking about what you call real time KYC. That's know your customer, but it's a framework within these banking system of how that works. That means faster capital. That means lower fraud. That's a big, big deal when it comes down to compliance, risk, and digital identity. And it's a smoother compliance, a lot smoother than what we've traditionally seen. So all these things are very, very important for us to get right. So Chris, you are back. I want you to verify and trust what I just said. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, Grant. And I think what's important right now in the region is that they strictly comply with all those rules and regulations at a U.S. bank level, so that they can get back into being a stronger part of the financial system.
So important.
Ways of doing that. One of the ways to do that is to be able to find new U.S. banks and European banks that are willing to come in and form those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the relationships will look different. In the past, the banks were in the Caribbean brick and mortars banks, right? So physical branches in places, mm-hmm. At least offices, especially offices for corporations and high net worth individuals, right? Mm-hmm. So we're not going to see that in the short term for sure, but what we can and we're looking to see, and we really believe that will happen, is that they will be able to have relationships with other U.S. banks, other European banks, to be able to move money. And when we start talking about some of our other topics like stable coins, this is going to really accelerate that process.
I think that's so important that we kind of tie everything we've been talking about together. Understanding, as you said, what a stable coin is, because it's backed, it's trusted, it's verified by the U.S. banking system. That is the game changer for what we're talking about, is that in St. Croix, because it is the U.S. presence in the Caribbean. So now we talk about brand recognition, right? That now you've got a trusted brand in the region, and because of the MOU that's been signed with CARICOM and the U.S. Virgin Islands, it now opens up that seat at the table that was never really there. And now you've got a global player. So when it comes to digital identity, I can trust you, I can verify you, I can see what's going on, and we can transact. I think it's just quicker, better, faster. And then it opens you up to global trade, which is huge. So when you're starting to move logistically, the supply chain within the Caribbean, and we've talked about that, and I want people to understand that a lot of times you don't get the goods and services that you need on time. I've heard so many people, oh, you don't understand living on an island. Living on an island is not like living on the mainland, because things are so far away. You don't always get things instantaneously. You got to wait for things to come via, ship or by air. There's no trucking, right? So to that effect. So, but it becomes even further delayed if you've got all the transactions that need to take place before you can even take things off the ship and get it out onto the island, and then everybody can then benefit from those goods and services. This is a game-changing kind of opportunity. We want the financial hub to operate out of St. Croix for a number of different reasons. Because of the Jones Act, there's different legislation in place. There is a network in place there. People don't realize, oh, you get poor internet. No, not in St. Croix. They've got a network that rivals Silicon Valley. That's a true statement that is there. So you can ride that backbone we talked about earlier, being able to transact as quickly as you can in New York or London out of St. Croix. Game-changing moment. Trust, verified source. So when you start operating out of cryptocurrencies, stablecoin, and then you can transfer back and forth exchange, foreign exchange rates, whether you're in Guyana or you're in Barbados, as you said, there to Trinidad, Tobago, you're in Jamaica. You can still operate in your own currencies if you like, but now you have this other opportunity to grow and get big. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. We're going to bring Chris back on because I can see him sitting there like, I can't wait to jump back in. So we're going to jump back in with Chris in just a moment. Thank you very much.
Sedicase efficacy chain, also known as chain of efficacy, a digital chain. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Educate, efficiency, effectiveness, and evolve. So whether you are doing market research, studying, doing market analysis, or making a critical financial decision, get the latest breaking, developing market news in the cryptocurrency markets at www.efficacycoin.com. Efficacy Cryptocurrency News is powered by Case Capital Markets. TravelShare. It Marketplace is an innovative, dynamic, user-friendly, and fully comprehensive global travel marketplace, featuring all Caribbean islands as a premier destinations. TravelShare. It Marketplace featured daily travel news, arts, culture, events, travel weather news, individuals' remote work, flex time, paid time off, family leisure time, and travel deals to better connect the U.S., Caribbean, and the Americas worldwide. So no matter where you want to travel in the world for work or leisure, working remotely or on vacation by yourself, with friends or family, whether by air or sea, TravelShare. It Marketplace makes it easy to get you to your destination. Book now at www.travelshare.com.
All right, we are back. So let's bring this home, Chris. I want to ask you this. How do you see St. Croix, Virgin Islands, through Sedicase? Again, that's the St. Croix Economic Development Initiative, Caribbean American Single Economy. How do you see Sedicase leading this digital identity movement for the Caribbean?
Grant, for me, it's really simple. St. Croix in the Virgin Islands is the gateway between the Caribbean nations and the rest of the world, particularly the U.S. Pretty simple. What the layer that's a little more difficult is how do we actually get that done? St. Croix has an amazing amount of things in place already, both from the legal aspects, physical aspects, and from the technology aspects, which makes it such an ideal location to be able to facilitate the rest of the Caribbean. First, it's also a Caribbean nation. Think the same, culture is the same, the understanding is the same, right? Second, it's U.S. territory. So that gives it a special place in terms of the Caribbean nations, because it can, people that are born in the U.S. Virgin Islands, for instance, have a U.S. passport, they're U.S. citizens right away, right? So the freedom to travel to the U.S. The rest of the Caribbean, the visa, ability to get visas or move that on to even green cards, it's a long and difficult process, right? And it's not getting any easier, as we have seen, right? The other thing that is really important, I think, is the amount of technology and education that's going on. To me, when I look at the Caribbean, I really see the greatest resource is the people. You have people in the Caribbean who are naturally hardworking, inquisitive. They want to know, they want to do, they want to make change, especially the younger people. We need to give them that platform where they're able to go ahead and do those things. Today, unfortunately, what's happening is a brain drain going on in the region where people are looking to find their opportunities in different places rather than right at home in their countries of origin. So providing them with that opportunity will bring together the Caribbean in a way that it can interact with the rest of the world on all levels.
Well, this is important. All of this is important to understand where you sit in relationship to the global economy. I think this is so important as we look and ask that question. Could St. Croix become a global sandbox, or we call it pilot zone for U.S. compliant digital identity innovation? This is so important. Again, this is about speed to market. The things that technology can do, I've always talked about this, and I will always bring this up. There's two things that technology does that when you look at it, that is a game changer. It can be a game changer in your business operations, even your personal life. That is speed. If you need to do something faster, quicker, better, you start looking at technology. The other part of that is communication. If you can communicate, I would call multimodal, in different types of ways that you can do it, whether it's a digital frame point, it's video, it's text, it's audio, in person. There's so many different ways to apply technology in so many different ways when it comes from a communication point, right? So if you can communicate faster, you speed up everything, right, to do things so you're not waiting. Who wants to wait in line? Everybody hates to wait in line. I know, Chris, you're a New Yorker. New Yorkers are used to waiting in line. Most people aren't used to waiting in line. But no one likes waiting in line. But if you can do it faster, why not? And I think if we speed up the transactions that are occurring within the Caribbean, and you have a trusted source out of a technology or a financial hub like St. Croix, it becomes better. We place this on the digital stage, on the financial stage, whether it's in CARICOM or the global trade, on the bigger stage, it becomes good. I think it's a great thing. Now, the question becomes, what are the risks of creating a centralized digital identity system? And then how does decentralized identity protect against abuse? And I know you're a big crypto guy, and I'm talking now about cybersecurity. What say you, Chris?
Well, Grant, you hit a bunch of things, and speed certainly is a big aspect of all. Is the vehicle that we use to create that velocity when we're looking to do things. And it's also important to remember and to add one thing to that, which is an issue in the Caribbean, which is transportation. Okay, so the speed, in not only in which data, for instance, but there is a lack of speed that moves people, moves cargo, moves goods, right? And this kind of region also, a lot of opportunity between islands to actually trade. You really hit it before. When you live on an island, you either survive on what is locally produced on the island, or you have to have things shipped in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, at many of these islands, the main way of shipping things in is by air freight. And while it's fast, back to your speed, it is expensive, especially for bulkier, heavier goods, right? And the ability to be able to move things over water is as important in the Caribbean as it is in the U.S. by moving trucks over roads. It's very similar kind of situation. The difference is we have roads and trucks here, and in the Caribbean we don't have the shipping capacity to move goods from island to island. And I think that there's so, and I think that also in the world to boost up the economies in those places. And all of it then comes back to when we start dealing with the rest of the world, how can they trust the country's region?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a tough thing. Technology right now is really one of the key ways we can do that. Okay, because we can now put identities onto the blockchain where it's that is the person that within you're dealing with, and that's a critical step, and to be able to do that, connect through St. Croix and the financial aspects that are placed there to be able to the rest of the world financial is also a key component. But it goes right back to your very first line of today's show, which is it's all about trust and how to create that.
Trust is you got to trust but verify. That's the big thing in the cybersecurity world. Trust but verify, and we got to look at this, and we need to realistically look at how hard this is to do, especially for small Caribbean banks or fintechs to implement digital ID or what we call KYC, which is Know Your Customer platforms. How hard is it to do that? Is there a plug and play, path to this? I am not sure, and we've learned lessons. I think we can learn lessons from places like Estonia or Singapore or other countries who have built a national digital ID system successfully. So I think it can be done. It just needs to be on the forefront of what we can do, especially when we're talking trade, finance, or remittances, right? Tourism is huge in all of the islands, especially the Virgin Islands. So if we can implement a KYC or AML type infrastructure that is agreed upon, it's agreed upon platform across not only the Caribbean, but the entire world, that's where we're getting to. I like that because this is how I think we solved a big problem years ago. There's a reason why you can go to an ATM anywhere pretty much in the world and get cash from it, because we have an agreed upon protocol and that all the banks throughout the world agree upon. And that type of agreement is what allows things to happen very quickly. And you can identify, you put your little plastic card into this little machine, and guess what? It's identified. They know who it is. It goes through its checks and balances. To your point, Chris, there's a lot of stuff happening at lightning speed that you can never really fathom as to why they can get access to your bank account and know exactly how much money is there and exactly how much can be dispensed to you. And then we take that for granted. And we need to apply this same type of thing when it comes to digital identity in world banking today, to allow these remittances to happen quickly. And we just talked about one of the biggest bottlenecks, like transportation, things of that nature. Some of the world doesn't like, I never really thought about that. But when you're on an isolated island, especially when you have storms and you have something that takes place that's a natural disaster, you need to communicate faster, right? And you need speed, because you need goods and services to be deployed at scale in a very short period of time. So being able to deploy these financial systems, these digital systems, these cryptocurrency systems, any way that we can then transfer value to the island and back forward, and then into the Caribbean archipelago, I think is very important. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back again. We're going to tie this all up, and we're going to tie it up with a bow, because we got to do it quickly, because Chris is going to be going to Saudi Arabia before we know it. Be right back.
Follow the Brand TV broadcast host, Grant McGaugh, as he visits with top executives and entrepreneurs to find out their secrets of success with their personal brand. Follow the Brand TV broadcast host as he focuses on brand development to build better relationships, bring value to your business, relationships, and career. You will enjoy listening to each episode that is tailored to speak to you directly. If you're looking for this type of clarity in terms of building your brand, you have tuned into the right station. Each episode will help you to shape a conversation in the 5-star BDM network of 20,000 professionals and become a springboard for your corporate engagement and business opportunities. Each guest will frame their story in the areas of personal branding, business development, career development, financial empowerment, and technology innovation. Grant McGaugh explains why he is the CEO and owner of his own professional career. Grant is an accomplished business leader and entrepreneur who wants to give back to individuals to grow their personal brand strategy. Tune in as he weaves his story about new possibilities, while to you exceed expectations. If you love storytelling, this show will make for fun.
Reimagine a world where the Caribbean is seamlessly connected, where our people, our cultures, and our economies move freely across the islands. This is Connect Caribbean, more than a ferry service. It's the heartbeat of a new era, an era where economic opportunities expand, where trade flows freely across our seas, and cultural exchange flourishes. We are linking businesses, empowering communities, and reigniting the hope for a truly integrated Caribbean. Together, we're shaping a brighter, more unified future for the Caribbean. Connect Caribbean, connecting our islands, our people, our future.
Third Wall Street is a new emerging global capital markets formation and structured trifactor financial hub at the U.S. third border in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, in the Caribbean and Latin America. The new Third Wall Street is the home of the Alexander Hamilton Financial Center and named in honor of Alexander Hamilton, an American founding father, first U.S. Treasury Secretary, and architect of the U.S. financial system and modern America. Third Wall Street is located in a U.S. National Heritage Area, Opportunity Zone, and the boyhood home of Alexander Hamilton in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Island, connecting 3 financial hubs in the Americas by way of new innovative financial technology and markets: New York Wall Street South, Brickell Avenue, Miami, and Third Wall Street in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, and established the new Caribbean America's Single Economy Zone, developed by SETI Case Capital Markets. Third Wall Street will transform financial markets, improving access to capital worldwide, Visit www.thirdwallstreet.com to learn more.
All right, we have returned. We're going to continue along the thoughts that we have been on today around digital identity, especially on the global stage, especially in the Caribbean, and especially in St. Croix, Virgin Islands. I believe this is a once in a generation opportunity. We are under U.S. jurisdiction, which gives us regulatory credibility. And we're also embedded in the Caribbean Trade Network. And by building a compliant digital identity infrastructure that's verified, that is secure, that is portable, we can become the first U.S. aligned entity and capital gateway for the region. And when you think of it like this, the future isn't just digital banking, it's digital trust. And that's what we are talking about, trust and compliance. So if St. Croix offers fast, they offer fast, secure, compliant onboarding for capital, for businesses, for institutions, we become the go-to financial node between the Americas and the Caribbean. So to Chris, what should people be watching for? If you're an entrepreneur, investor, policy thinker, what's the next move? What should they be watching or doing next?
Grant, first, I got to take a little umbrage with one of your opening statements, which is it's been said, I think Ronald Reagan was the one who said it, which is trust but verify.
Yeah.
Okay. In the banking business, it's verify and then trust.
Back. Okay. Yeah.
That's exactly how it has to. There is no trust at all until you have been verified as a person, until you have gone through the KYC, know your customer, until you've gone through the compliance checks for anti-money laundering, for terrorist funding, for any of these illegal activities. Until all of that's been vetted, there's only verification. There's no trust. Once you pass all that, okay, now you have trust. So in the banking business, it's verify, then trust. And that's really what we need to get to. And one of the big pieces of this is cybersecurity, right? Mm-hmm. So we see that there is a whole criminal underbelly out there that really attacks us from the cyber world. They attack us in technology. It's no longer I walk into the bank with a gun and a note and say, give me all your money, right?
Yeah.
Now, you never see me. You have no idea where in the world I am. And I'm on my keyboard and I'm just taking your money.
Right.
And you don't even notice it until it's gone, right? So it's a whole new thing out there when you talk cybersecurity. You have to fight back in the same medium, right? Before the police could track down that bank robber and hold a gun to him and take him in, right?
Yeah.
Now we've got to go ahead and on our keyboards track where did this money move to? How did it move? Who did it go through? And it's much more difficult. And it's a lot of time and effort. But today we have systems in place that do that. We have the abilities now, technology-wise, to fight back. And the key to it is, again, verify and then trust. The key to it is your digital ID. Mm-hmm. The key to it is knowing who the person is and who you're dealing with. So, you spend a lot of time thinking, oh, nothing ever happened to me. Why I have to go through all these passwords and security questions and everything else? Okay, this is why. And once we can get this done in a global fashion, and I would say in the banking system we are, and we have done that. But what it leaves open is one of the communities that I'm really in favor of is the unbanked. Okay,
the unbanked, yes.
There are a lot of people in this world, right, who have no identity. I'll give you a great example. If you're born in Gaza or on the West Bank, no identity. There's no recognized Palestinian passport, and the Israelis won't give you a passport because they don't want you there.
Wow.
Right? So how do you even immigrate? How do you, so it's all done two ways, right? Either you can make a case for and claim that you're being prosecuted and you need refuge, or you do it illegally. And here in the United States, if you look at Los Angeles, right? Los Angeles, the community is about 10 million. 1,000 people out of that 10 million are illegal, undocumented aliens. So what do we do about those people, Grant? We can go to Africa, and there are people out on the savannas who are goat herders, right? And they, they sell their goats. They can use their phone now to pay and get paid, but they don't have a driver's license. They haven't gotten their passport. I mean, so how do we solve this? This, to me, is the one lingering question. And I mean, you get this everywhere. And with the dramatic increase in illegal aliens throughout Europe, in the United States, and in many countries, it just complicates and worsens the problem.
That's a big thing. And I don't think there's no universal answer for that as far as the problem. And it's in many, many things. Just like if you're isolated, you're not going to have dollar bills. You go back to the bartering system, right? That becomes a system of value. But I'll go back to my branding world, and I harp on this a lot, because if you're not visible, you're invisible. That means you can't participate in that particular system. So if you're looking for business development, you're looking for career development, these types of things, you got to be visible in the market that you're looking to influence. Bottom line, end of story. So when you look at your own identity or how you are identified, and you say to yourself, well, I want to attract certain investors, I want to attract certain funding sources, I want to attract certain VCs, private equity, all this kind of stuff. Are you visible to them, to that particular influence? That's the biggest thing. That's one of the biggest things that you have to answer, because if you're not visible, you're not in the room, and you got to make yourself visible in the room. And how do they see value? How does your market see value? And are you, again, visible in that value? The visibility of value becomes the albatross in the room. And as we move forward, as what we're doing right now, me and Chris, we are making St. Croix very, very visible because it has value. And we want to make it that visibility to be in front of our target market, which is the entire Caribbean and the banking world. And not only that, the investment world. And they say, hey, this is a viable vehicle of innovation and technology and finance, and we can grow this. So with that said, we're going to come back. We're going to probably see what happens with Chris out there in Saudi Arabia here pretty soon. So thanks again for being in the big picture. Chris, you want to give us your last word?
The solution to this is technology, and we're going down that path with great velocity, Grant. So I'm very optimistic.
Thank you very much for being on the show. You take care.
Thanks, Grant.